Welcome back to the Untold Stories, exclusive before Start the Story Now. Subscribe to the channel and comment down where you're from and what time it is for you right now. Now, turn off the lights, settle in, and let the darkness speak. On October 14, 1879, the Carver family left their home on Millbrook Road before dawn. They locked the doors. They banked the fire. They took nothing but a single trunk. By noon, every window in the house was open. By dusk, smoke rose from the chimney. By midnight, neighbors saw candlelight moving room to room, though no one had returned. The house was waiting. Southeastern Ohio in 1879 was a place of deep valleys and deeper silences. The hills pressed close to the narrow roads. Coal dust hung in the air, settling on porches, windowsills, the shoulders of men walking home from the mines. Everything smelled of damp earth and iron in autumn. When the leaves turned early and the fog rolled in at dusk, the valleys filled like bowls of gray water, thick, cold, suffocating. Ashford was a town of 300 souls. Most worked the mines. The rest served those who did. There was a general store, a post office, a church with a leaning steeple, and a saloon that closed on Sundays. The streets were unpaved. When it rained, the mud swallowed wagon wheels to the axle. 3 miles outside town, where Millbrook Road bent sharply to follow the creek, stood the Carver house. It was a plain structure. 2 stories. Whitewashed wood, though the paint had begun to peel. The porch sagged on the left side, and the roof showed patches where shingles had blown off in storms. A stone well sat in the front yard. Behind the house, a line of sycamore trees marked the edge of the property, their white bark glowing faintly in the moonlight. The house had no neighbors within shouting distance. It sat alone, and it had always felt alone, even when people lived. Inside it, the Severus Carver arrived in Ashford in the spring of 1868 with his wife Margaret and their infant daughter, Eliza. He'd taken a position as bookkeeper for the Ashford Mining Company. Steady work, modest pay, enough to rent a small house and start a life. Henry was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers. He walked with his shoulders hunched, as if carrying a weight no one else could see. He spoke little. At church, he sat in the back pew and left before the final hymn. Margaret was different, at least. At first, she had a soft voice and kind eyes. She grew vegetables in the yard, kept bees, baked bread for neighbors. People liked her. She smiled easily. But there was something cautious in the way she moved through the world, as though she were always listening for something just out of earshot. Their daughter, Eliza, was a watchful child, pale, thin. She rarely played with other children. Instead, she sat on the porch steps with her doll, staring at the sycamore trees, or the well, or the road. When spoken to, she answered in whispers. In the summer of 1868, Henry purchased the house on Millbrook Road. The price was low, far lower than it should have been. The previous owner, a man named Amos Pritchard, had moved to Pennsylvania without explanation. Before that, the house had changed hands 4 times in 6 years. No family stayed longer than a season. When Henry signed the deed, the land agent said, "It's a fine house. Solid bones. You'll do well there." But his eyes didn't meet Henry's when he said it. The Carvers moved in on a Tuesday in June. For the first few years, they seemed content. Henry walked to the mining office each morning at dawn, ledger tucked under his arm. Margaret tended the garden and sold honey at the general store. Eliza grew slowly, quietly, like a plant in shade. But people noticed things. Small things. Margaret stopped smiling as much. Henry's hands began to tremble when he wrote. Eliza stopped speaking unless spoken to, and the house, always warm, even in winter, seemed to hum with a presence no one could name. The whispers, B.G. and Mrs. Abigail Hallwell lived a quarter mile down Millbrook Road in a small cottage with her husband, Thomas, a retired mine foreman. She was a practical woman, not given to gossip or superstition. But in the winter of 1872, she began to notice changes in the Carver household. Margaret stopped attending church. When Abigail visited, Margaret would stand in the doorway, blocking entry, speaking in clipped sentences. Her eyes darted toward the rooms behind her, as if checking to see if someone were listening. "We're fine," Margaret would say. "Just tired." But her hands shook. One evening in early February, Abigail saw Margaret standing in the yard at dusk. She wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the house, her arms at her sides. Abigail called out to her. Margaret didn't turn. After a long moment, she spoke so quietly that Abigail almost didn't hear. "It's listening now." Abigail stepped closer. "What's listening, Margaret?" Margaret finally turned. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red. "The house," she whispered. Then she went inside and shut the door. Abigail wrote about it in her diary that night. February 8, 1872. "I do not know what troubles Margaret Carver, but I fear it is more than exhaustion." She spoke of the house as though it were alive. "I think she is unwell. I think they all are. But it wasn't illness. It was something else. The change. By the spring of 1873, the changes in the Carver family were undeniable. Henry stopped going to church altogether. His supervisor at the mining company noted that he arrived early and left late, as if he were avoiding going home. His ledgers, once immaculate, began to show errors. Numbers crossed out. Pages torn. Margaret no longer sold honey. She no longer tended the garden. Neighbors who passed the house said they saw her standing at the windows, staring out, not at anything in particular, just staring. Eliza, now 5 years old, had stopped playing entirely. She sat on the porch steps, unmoving, her doll clutched in her lap. When other children passed, she didn't wave or call out. She only watched them with dark, unblinking eyes. One afternoon, Mrs. Hallwell saw Eliza in the yard. The child was kneeling by the well, leaning over the edge, looking down into the darkness. "Eliza," Abigail called. "Careful, darling." Eliza didn't move. Abigail hurried over and pulled the child back. "You could fall, sweetheart. You mustn't lean so far." Eliza looked up at her with empty eyes. "They're down there," she said. "Who's down there?" "The ones who stayed." Abigail felt a coldness spread through her chest. She looked into the well. There was nothing but darkness and the faint sound of dripping water. She took Eliza by the hand and led her back to the porch. Margaret was standing in the doorway, watching. "She shouldn't go near the well," Abigail said. Margaret nodded slowly. "I know. Then why do you let her?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because it calls to her." Abigail left and did not return. The year of Silence, from 1874 to 1878. The Carver family became ghosts in their own lives. They were seen, but rarely spoken to. They attended no gatherings. They sent no letters. The garden grew wild. The paint on the house peeled further. The porch sagged deeper, but the house itself seemed more alive than ever. At night, lamps burned in every window until dawn. Smoke rose from the chimney, even in summer. And on still evenings, neighbors claimed they heard singing soft, mournful, wordless drifting from inside. But when anyone knocked, the singing stopped, and no one answered the door. In the summer of 1877, a traveling preacher named Reverend Calhoun came to Ashford and held a revival meeting in the church. Margaret Carver attended alone. She sat in the last pew, head bowed, hands folded in her lap. After the service, Reverend Calhoun approached her. "Sister," he said gently, "I see a heaviness in you." Margaret looked up at him. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. "Reverend," she whispered, "can a house have a soul?" He blinked. I don't understand. If a place holds enough sorrow, she continued, enough fear, enough longing, can it become something? Can it what? Reverend Calhoun felt a chill despite the summer heat. Sister, what troubles you? Margaret stood. She looked at him with an expression he would later describe as both terrified and resigned. It doesn't want us to leave, she said. Then she walked out of the church. She never returned. The final W.E. sin. The autumn of 1879. Something shifted. The house on Millbrook Road grew darker. The windows, once glowing with lamplight, became shadowed. The curtains were drawn. The door stayed closed. Henry stopped going to work. His supervisor sent a messenger to check on him. The messenger knocked. No answer. He tried the door. Locked. He peered through a window. Inside, he saw Henry sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wall. Margaret stood behind him, hands on his shoulders. Eliza sat on the floor, rocking back and forth. None of them moved. None of them blinked. The messenger left and reported what he'd seen. The supervisor shrugged. If he doesn't come back, we'll find another bookkeeper. No one went to check on them again. On the night of October 13th, 1879, Mrs. Hallwell woke to the sound of a wagon on Millbrook Road. She went to the window and saw the Carver family loading a single trunk onto their wagon by lantern light. Henry's face was pale and slick with sweat. Margaret moved stiffly, like a puppet. Eliza sat motionless in the back of the wagon, staring at the house. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. They drove away in silence. Abigail watched until the lantern light disappeared. Around the bend, she looked back at the house. The front door was open. Wind howled softly. And in the doorway, just for a moment, she thought she saw a figure, tall. Still, watching. Then the door swung shut. Section 1 hook ending. By dawn, the Carvers were gone. But the house was not empty. It had never been empty. October 14th, 1879, began like any other autumn morning in Ashford, Ohio. The sun rose pale and cold over the valley. Frost clung to the grass. Smoke curled from chimneys. Men walked toward the mines with lunch pails and tired eyes. Women swept porches and called children in for breakfast. But on Millbrook Road, something had changed. The Carver house sat in silence. No smoke rose from its chimney. No curtains moved in the windows. The door, locked tight when the family left before dawn, now stood slightly ajar, as if someone had opened it from the inside and walked away. Mrs. Abigail Hallwell noticed it first. She'd been awake since before dawn, unable to shake the image of the Carvers loading their wagon in the dark. Something about the way Margaret had moved, stiff, mechanical, like a woman walking in her sleep, had unsettled her deeply. At 7:30, Abigail walked down Millbrook Road with a basket of bread. She told herself she was simply being neighborly. But the truth was, she needed to see the house in daylight. She needed to confirm that they were truly gone. As she approached, the silence thickened. No birdsong. No wind. Just the faint creak of the porch board settling. The front door was open. Margaret? Abigail called from the road. Henry? No answer. She stepped closer. Is anyone home? Still nothing. She climbed the sagging porch steps, her heart beating faster with each one. The door hung half open, revealing a sliver of the dim interior. She could see the edge of the kitchen table, a chair, the corner of the stove. Everything was still. Abigail pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The air was wrong. It wasn't cold despite the morning chill outside and the dead fire in the stove. The house was warm. Not pleasantly warm, but body warm, as if the walls themselves were holding heat. Abigail stood in the doorway, every instinct screaming at her to leave, but she couldn't. She took another step inside the front room looked exactly as it had the last time Abigail had seen it nearly a year ago. The furniture was arranged neatly. A quilt lay folded over the back of the sofa. A pair of Henry's boots sat by the door. On the kitchen table, 3 plates were set, as if for a meal. Forks and knives laid out precisely. Cups turned upside down. But there was no food. No dust either. Everything was clean. Orderly. Waiting. Abigail moved through the kitchen, her footsteps muffled by a rug worn thin in the center. She ran her hand along the back of a chair. It was warm to the touch. She pulled her hand back as if burned. "Hello," she called again, though she knew no one would answer. The house seemed to inhale, not literally. But the air shifted. The warmth intensified. And for just a moment, Abigail felt a presence behind her close enough to touch. She spun around. Nothing. Her breath came quick and shallow. She backed toward the door, eyes scanning the room, the hallway, the stairs leading up to the second floor. That's when she saw it. On the small table by the stairs, there was a piece of paper. It hadn't been there when she'd entered. She was certain of it. Abigail picked up the paper with trembling hands. The handwriting was Margaret's. "We cannot stay. But we cannot leave. It will not allow it. The house is not empty. It has never been empty. Forgive us." Abigail folded the note carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. She left the house without looking back, but as she reached the road, she heard it, a window on the second floor sliding open. She didn't turn around. She walked home as fast as her legs would carry her. The town Arias, by midday. Word had spread through Ashford. The Carvers were gone. The house was empty, or seemed to be. And something about it wasn't right. At the general store, men gathered around the stove, smoking pipes and trading theories. "Probably just forgot to lock the door," said Bill Tremont, a miner with hands like slabs of stone. "Forgot?" scoffed Samuel Cross, the store owner. "Henry Carver was the most careful man I ever knew. He didn't forget anything. Maybe they were in a hurry," someone offered. "In a hurry to where?" Cross replied. "They didn't tell a soul they were leaving. Didn't settle accounts, just vanished." Abigail Hallwell entered the store, her face pale, her hands still shaking. The men fell silent. "You all right, Mrs. Hallwell?" Cross asked. She nodded, though it wasn't convincing. "I went to the house this morning." "And?" "The door was open. The house was warm. There was a note." She pulled the folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Cross. He read it aloud. "What does it mean?" someone asked. "It means," Cross said slowly, "that something drove them out. And whatever it was, it's still there." "Or," said Tremont, "Margaret Carver finally lost her mind, and Henry took her away before she hurt herself or the child." Abigail shook her head. "It wasn't madness. I saw her face that night. She wasn't confused. She was terrified." "Of what?" "Of the house." Cross folded the note and handed it back to Abigail. "Someone should tell the constable. Someone should burn that house down," muttered a man in the back. No one disagreed. The constable's Visa T. James Drucker was the constable of Ashford. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a thick beard and a reputation for level-headedness. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any such nonsense, but he believed in duty. On the afternoon of October 15th, he rode out to the Carver house with 2 men, Bill Tremont and a young farmhand named Thomas Grier. They arrived just as the sun began to dip toward the hills. The house looked abandoned. The door was closed now, though Drucker was certain Abigail had said she'd left it open. The windows were shut, the curtains drawn. "Looks quiet enough," Tremont said. "Looks don't mean much," Drucker replied. He dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail. The other men followed. Drucker knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps. No answer. He tried the handle. Unlocked. They stepped inside. The siesta, the interior was dim, even with the afternoon sun outside. The curtains blocked most of the light, and the air was heavy, thick with warmth and something else. Something faint and unpleasant, like old flowers left too long in water. Drucker moved through the front room, eyes scanning every corner. "Check upstairs," he told Grier. Tremont, Take the kitchen and back rooms." They separated. Drucker remained in the parlor. He examined the furniture, the walls, the floor. Everything was neat. Too neat. As if someone had carefully arranged the room for display. He opened a small drawer in the side table. Inside he found a tintype photograph of the Carver family. Henry stood behind Margaret, his hand on her shoulder. Margaret held baby Eliza in her lap. They weren't smiling, but they looked whole, human. Drucker slipped the photograph into his pocket. Grier appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Sir, you need to see something." The BGR on the second floor was darker than the first. There were 3 rooms. A small bedroom for Eliza, a larger one for Henry and Margaret, and a narrow storage room at the end of the hall. Grier led Drucker to the main bedroom. The door was open. Inside, the bed was made, the quilt pulled tight. A brush and hand mirror sat on the dresser. A pair of Margaret's shoes were placed neatly by the wardrobe dot, but on the small writing desk. Beneath the window, there was something that hadn't been there before. A letter. Drucker picked it up. The ink was fresh. The handwriting was Margaret's. October 15th, 1879. Drucker's blood went cold. Today's date. But the Carvers had left yesterday. He continued reading. "To anyone who enters this house, we are not here. But we have not left. The house does not wish to be empty. It has kept others before us. It will keep us now. Do not stay after dark. Do not light the lamps. Do not listen to the sounds in the walls. It is not malicious. It is lonely. And loneliness, when it is old enough, becomes hunger." Tremont appeared in the doorway. "Found anything?" Drucker folded the letter carefully. His voice was steady, but his face had gone pale. "We're leaving." "What? Why?" "Because we're not wanted here." "What does that mean?" Drucker didn't answer. He walked past Tremont, down the stairs, and out the front door without looking back. The other men followed. They mounted their horses and rode back to town in silence. Behind them, the house stood still, but in the upstairs window, a curtain moved. Just slightly. The first Anige EHT that evening. As the sun set and the valley filled with shadows, something happened at the Carver house. Thomas Grier's younger brother, Peter, was walking home from a friend's farm. The road took him past Millbrook Road. He knew he shouldn't look, but he did. The house was dark, but as he watched, a light appeared in the downstairs window. A candle, he thought, flickering, soft. Then another light appeared in the kitchen window. Then one upstairs. Peter stopped walking. His heart thudded in his chest. The lights moved slowly, deliberately from room to room, as if someone were walking through the house, checking each space, making sure everything was in order. But no one was there. No one could be there. Peter ran. He didn't stop until he reached home. When he told his brother what he'd seen, Thomas believed him, because Thomas had seen something too. While standing in the upstairs bedroom, just before they left, he'd heard something in the walls. Not scratching. Not animals. Breathing. The house was awake. Over the next 3 days, more people saw the lights, more people heard the sounds. And more people began to realize the terrible truth. The Carvers hadn't abandoned the house. The house had kept them. October 17th, 1879. 3 days after the Carvers vanished, the house on Millbrook Road had become the subject of whispered conversations in every corner of Ashford. At the general store, in the church pews, at the mining company office, everyone had heard something. Some had seen the lights. Others had heard the sounds. A few claimed they'd seen figures moving past the window, shapes that looked human but moved wrong, too slow or too sudden. Like shadows cast by a stuttering flame. The constable had posted a notice at the general store. "The property at Millbrook Road is under investigation. Do not trespass." But notices mean little to curiosity, and in a town where entertainment was scarce, mystery was irresistible. Thomas Grier's Thomas Grier. Couldn't stop thinking about the house. He was a practical man. 23 years old. Worked on his father's farm. Didn't believe in hauntings or spirits. He'd been raised Methodist, taught that the dead stayed dead and the living had no business fearing shadows. But he'd heard the breathing in the walls, and he needed to understand it. On the evening of October 17th, just after dusk, Thomas walked back to the Carver house alone. He carried a lantern in one hand and a walking stick in the other, not for defense, but for confidence. He told himself he'd only look through the windows, confirm the house was empty, prove to himself and his brother that there was a rational explanation. Maybe someone was squatting there. Maybe it was drifters or pranksters. Or he reached the house. The door was open. Again. Thomas stood at the edge of the porch, staring at the darkened doorway. His lantern cast long, trembling shadows across the warped boards. "Hello?" he called. His voice sounded small. Swallowed. No answer. He stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under his weight. He raised the lantern and peered inside. The interior was dark but not empty. He could feel it. A presence. Not hostile, exactly, but aware. Watching. "I'm coming in," Thomas said aloud, as if announcing himself to whatever was there might make it less frightening. It didn't. He stepped through the door. Inside again. The air inside was warmer than it had been 3 days ago. Thomas felt sweat prick the back of his neck despite the autumn chill outside. He moved through the front room slowly, holding the lantern high. The furniture was still arranged neatly, the plates still on the table. But now there was something else. A smell, faint, sweet, like wildflowers left in a closed room too long. Thomas moved toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house were pressing down on him. Testing his resolve, he reached the base of the staircase and looked up into the darkness. The second floor was pitch black, but he could hear something, a soft sound, rhythmic, like fabric brushing against wood. "Who's there?" Thomas called. The sound stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then from the top of the stairs a voice, quiet, fragile, a child's voice. "We're not supposed to let anyone in." Thomas froze. "Eliza?" he whispered. No answer. He raised the lantern higher, trying to see the top of the stairs. The light didn't reach. The darkness seemed to absorb it, pulling it in like water into sand. "Eliza, is that you?" "Mama says the house gets sad when it's empty," the voice continued. "So we have to stay." Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. "Where's your mother, Eliza? Where's your father?" "They're here." "Where?" "Everywhere." Thomas backed toward the door. His hands shook so badly the lantern nearly slipped from his grip. "I'm leaving now," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's all right," the voice said, soft, almost kind. "You can go." "Thank you," Thomas stammered. "But you'll come back." "What?" "Everyone comes back." Thomas didn't wait to see what appeared. He turned and ran. Thomas Grier burst into his family's farmhouse just after 8 o'clock. Pale and sweating, his eyes wild, his father, Robert, looked up from his chair by the fire. "Thomas, what's wrong?" Thomas collapsed into a chair, gasping for breath. "I went back to the Carver house." His younger brother Peter sat up. "Why would you do that?" "I needed to see. I needed to know." "And?" Robert asked. Thomas looked at him, his face pale as parchment. "She was there." "Who?" "Eliza. I heard her. She spoke to me." "That's not possible," Robert said. "The Carvers are gone. I know what I heard." Peter leaned forward. "What did she say?" Thomas swallowed hard. "She said they're still in the house. She said the house gets sad when it's empty. She said..." He trailed off, unable to finish. "What?" Robert pressed. "She said I'll come back." Robert stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. "You're not going near that place again, you hear me?" Thomas nodded. But deep down, he knew it was a lie, because part of him, some small, irrational part, wanted to go back, needed to go back. The rumors read by the next morning. Thomas's story had spread through Ashford like wildfire. Some believed him. Others called him a fool or a liar. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something was wrong with the Carver house. At the general store, Samuel Cross listened to the theories with growing frustration. "It's an empty house," he said. "Wind blows doors open. Shadows play tricks. That's all." "Then explain the lights," said Bill Tremont. "Reflections. Lanterns from the road. At midnight? In the middle of nowhere?" Cross had no answer. Mrs. Holwell, who had been listening quietly from the corner, finally spoke. "I've lived here 40 years. I've seen strange things before. But I've never seen a house behave like this." "Behave?" Someone scoffed. "It's wood and nails, Abigail, is it?" She replied softly. "Then why does it feel like it's waiting?" A woman named Clara Finch, who lived on the far side of town, raised her hand hesitantly. "I saw something last night." Everyone turned to her. "Go on," Cross said. Clara's voice trembled. "I was walking home late from my sister's house. I took the long road past Millbrook. I know I shouldn't have, but it's shorter. And I saw a woman standing in the yard." "What did she look like?" Cross asked. "She was wearing a gray dress. Her hair was loose. She was just standing there, facing the house, like she was waiting for someone to let her in." "Did you speak to her?" Clara shook her head. "I was too frightened. But as I walked past, she turned and looked at me. And it was Margaret Carver." "That's not possible," Tremont said. "The Carvers left days ago." "I know what I saw," Clara insisted, her voice rising. "It was her. I'd swear it on the Bible." Cross rubbed his temples. "Did she say anything?" "No, she just smiled." "Smiled?" "Yes." Clara's hands twisted in her lap, like she was relieved. The constable's DCISN Constable Drucker sat at his desk in the small office behind the general store, staring at the 2 letters he'd taken from the Carver house. One written by Margaret before they left, one written after. He'd read them both a dozen times. He'd examined the ink, the handwriting, the paper. Everything was consistent, but it was impossible. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." Samuel Cross entered, his expression grim. "People are getting nervous, James. I know. They're saying the house is haunted. I know. Is it?" Drucker looked at him. "What do you want me to say, Samuel? That I believe a house can think? That it can keep people prisoner? I want you to say what you believe." Drucker leaned back in his chair. "I believe the Carvers left that house in fear. I believe something happened there that we don't understand. And I believe that house is not safe. Then burn it." "I can't. It's private property." "The owner is gone." "We don't know that. Legally, the house still belongs to Henry Carver until we prove otherwise. And that takes time." Cross slammed his hand on the desk. "People are seeing things, James, hearing things. How long before someone gets hurt?" Drucker said nothing. "I'll post another notice," Drucker said finally. "Stronger wording. No one goes near that house. Not for any reason. And if they do, then God help them." The 2nd NIGHT October 18th, 1879. That night, the lights appeared again. But this time, they were brighter, and they moved faster. A farmer named Jacob Maris was returning home late from a card game in town. His route took him past the bend in Millbrook Road. He'd heard the stories. But he wasn't a superstitious man. As he approached, he saw the house. Every window was lit. Not with candles. This was different. The light was steady, golden, warm. It looked like a family home on a winter evening. Inviting. Safe. Jacob stopped his wagon. He stared at the house. Frowning. Someone was inside. They had to be. Against his better judgment, Jacob climbed down from the wagon and approached the house. The front door was closed. He knocked. "Hello?" he called. "Is anyone home?" No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. Jacob walked around to the side of the house and peered through a window. Inside, he saw the parlor fully lit by lamps on every table. The furniture gleamed. The floor looked freshly swept. A fire burned in the hearth, flames dancing cheerfully. But there was no one there. Jacob's breath fogged the glass. He leaned closer, and then he saw it. In the reflection of the window. Behind him a figure. Tall, still, watching. Jacob spun around. Nothing. He was alone. But when he looked back at the window, the lights inside were gone. The house was dark. Jacob ran back to his wagon and whipped the horse into a gallop. He didn't look back, but if he had, he would have seen the figure standing in the doorway, watching him go. The house was no longer waiting passively. It was reaching out. Testing. Calling. And one by one, the people of Ashford were beginning to answer. November 1st, 1879. 2 weeks had passed since the Carvers disappeared. The house on Millbrook Road had become a blight on the town's conscience. No one spoke of it openly anymore, but everyone thought about it. The lights continued to appear each night. Travelers avoided the road after dark. Children were forbidden from going anywhere near it. And still, no one had heard from the Carvers. Into this uneasy silence came Edmund Voss, a lawyer from the county seat in Lancaster. He was a tall man in his 40s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes and a skeptical temperament. He had been hired by the Ashford Mining Company to settle Henry Carver's accounts and determine the legal status of the property. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in contracts, deeds, and the law. Voss arrived at Constable Drucker's office on the morning of November 1st, carrying a leather satchel and an air of mild irritation. "Constable Drucker?" he said, extending a hand. Drucker shook it. "Mr. Voss, thank you for coming." "Let's be clear," Voss said, settling into a chair. "I'm here to resolve a property matter, not investigate folklore. I've heard the rumors. I'm not interested." Drucker nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But I'd advise caution." "That house is a house," Voss interrupted. "Nothing more." Drucker leaned back. "Then you'll have no trouble going inside." Voss smiled thinly. "None whatsoever." Entering the house A.L.O.N.E. later that afternoon, Edmund Voss arrived at the Carver house alone. He'd refused Drucker's offer to accompany him. He wanted no distractions, no superstitious mutterings. Just a thorough, professional examination of the property. The house looked abandoned. Paint peeling. Porch sagging. Windows dark. Voss tied his horse to the post and approached with his satchel in hand. The front door was unlocked. The interior was dim and still. Voss lit a small lantern and moved through the front room, making notes on a pad of paper. Kitchen, functional. Furniture, intact. No signs of damage or forced entry. He moved methodically, examining each room with a lawyer's detachment. But as he worked, he began to notice things. Small things. The air was too warm for an unheated house in November. The floors were clean, no dust, no dirt, despite weeks of abandonment. And the silence was wrong, not peaceful, expectant. He shook his head, annoyed with himself. "You're letting them get to you," he muttered. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. The attic was accessed by a narrow ladder in the upstairs hallway. Voss climbed carefully, lantern held high, and emerged into a low-ceilinged space filled with crates, trunks, and forgotten odds and ends. He began sorting through the items, looking for anything of legal value: deeds, contracts, correspondence. In the corner, beneath a moth-eaten blanket, he found a wooden chest. Inside were personal effects, a Bible, a bundle of letters tied with string, and a leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to Henry Carver. Voss sat on a crate and began to read by lantern light. The early entries were mundane notes about work, weather, repairs to the house. But as Voss read further, the tone began to change. March 12, 1870. Margaret says she hears footsteps at night. I have checked every room. There is no one. I think the house is simply old and settles strangely. I have assured her there is nothing to fear. July 3, 1871. Eliza woke screaming last night. She said there was a woman standing by her bed, watching her. Margaret has taken to sleeping in Eliza's room. I do not know what to do. Voss's expression shifted from skepticism to unease. November 19, 1872. The house is never cold. Even when the fire dies, the walls remain warm. Margaret says it is because the house is alive. I tell her this is nonsense, but I do not believe my own words. April 4, 1874. I found Eliza in the parlor this morning, setting the table for 10 people. When I asked why, she said, "They're coming for dinner." I asked who. She said, "The ones who live in the walls." The later entries grew more frantic. The handwriting uneven. October 2, 1878. We cannot leave. We have tried 3 times. Each time something stops us. The wagon breaks. The road floods. Margaret falls ill. It is as if the house knows, as if it will not allow it. March 15, 1879. I understand now. This house was not built for the living. It was built for something else. A place to hold, to keep. There were others before us. I have found their names carved into the beams in the cellar. 11 families. All gone. All forgotten. August 30th, 1879. Margaret no longer speaks. She only listens. Eliza has stopped eating. I can feel it now pressing against my thoughts, whispering in the spaces between heartbeats. It wants us to stay. It needs us to stay. Because if we leave, it will be alone again. And it cannot bear to be alone. The final entry was dated October 13th, 1879. We are leaving at dawn. I do not know if it will allow us to go. I think it will try to stop us. But we must try. If you are reading this, you are in the house. Leave now. Do not stay after dark. Do not light the lamps. Do not speak to the voices in the walls. It is not evil. It is lonely. And loneliness, when it grows old enough, becomes hunger. Voss sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the journal. Then he heard it. A sound from below. Footsteps. He wasn't alone. The encounter. Hello. Voss called down through the attic opening. Who's there? No answer. The footsteps continued, slow, methodical, moving from the kitchen to the parlor to the stairs. Voss descended the ladder quickly, his heart pounding. He reached the second-floor hallway and looked toward the stairs. A figure stood at the bottom. Tall, still, silhouetted against the dim light from the front door. Identify yourself, Voss said, his voice shaking despite his best efforts. The figure didn't move. Voss raised his lantern. The light revealed a man, thin, wire-rimmed glasses. Dark coat. Henry Carver. That's not possible, Voss whispered. Henry said nothing. He simply stood there, staring up at Voss with hollow, exhausted eyes. Then he spoke. His voice was soft, distant. You shouldn't have come. Mr. Carver? Voss stammered. Everyone thinks you're gone. Where have you been? Here. Here? In this house? Always. Voss descended the stairs slowly, keeping his eyes on Henry. Your family, where are they? Henry turned and looked toward the parlor. They're here too. Voss followed his gaze. In the parlor, sitting on the sofa, were Margaret and Eliza. They didn't move. Didn't blink. They simply sat, hands folded, staring at nothing. What? What happened to you? Voss asked. Henry looked at him with something like pity. We tried to leave, but the house wouldn't let us. That's absurd. You're free to go whenever. No, Henry interrupted. We're not. Voss took a step back. This is madness. You're all suffering from some kind of ... delusion. You need help. Henry shook his head slowly. You don't understand. The house isn't a place. It's a need. It was built on old ground. Ground that remembers. Ground that holds. Holds what? Everything that refuses to leave. Voss's hands shook. I'm going to get help. The constable, a doctor. Don't, Henry said quietly. Why not? Because if you bring others here, it will keep them too. Leave now, Henry continued, before it decides you belong here. Voss didn't wait for further explanation. He turned and ran. Voss burst out of the house and stumbled down the porch steps, nearly falling. He ran to his horse, fumbling with the reins, his hands shaking so badly he could barely untie them. Behind him, the house stood silent, but as he mounted the horse and turned to leave, he looked back. All three of them, Henry, Margaret, and Eliza, stood in the doorway. Watching him go, they didn't wave, they didn't call out. They just watched. Voss rode back to town at a full gallop, his mind reeling, when he reached Constable Drucker's office. He barely managed to speak. They're there, he gasped. The Carvers. They're still in the house. Drucker stood. What? They never left. They trapped, or they think they are. I don't know. But they're there. Did they hurt you? No, they told me to leave. They said the house would keep me if I stayed. Drucker grabbed his coat. Show me. No. Voss shouted. You can't go back there. If you do, if I do, what? Voss looked at him with wild eyes. It will never let you leave. For a long time. Drucker said nothing. Then he pulled out the letters he'd taken from the house weeks ago and laid them on the desk. I need to see for myself, he said quietly. You're a fool. Voss replied. Maybe, but I'm still going. The next morning, Constable James Drucker rode out to the Carver house. He took 2 men with him. None of them came back the same. November 3rd, 1879. The sun rose cold and pale over the valley, casting long shadows across Millbrook Road. Frost clung to the grass. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Constable James Drucker stood outside the Carver house with 2 men, Bill Tremont and Samuel Cross. All 3 were armed not with guns, but with lanterns, rope, and grim determination. They'd come to bring the Carvers home, or prove, once and for all, that the house was empty. You sure about this, James? Cross asked, his voice uneasy. Drucker nodded. Edmund Voss saw them. If they're in there, we bring them out. If they're not ... quotes he trailed off. If they're not? Tremont pressed. Then we burn it. The front door stood open, as it so often did now. The 3 men exchanged glances, then stepped inside. Inside the house, on the interior, was exactly as it had been every other time. Neat, clean, warm. But this time, there was something else. A presence, not hostile, not malicious, but overwhelming. Like standing too close to a fire, feeling its heat pressing against your skin. Henry? Drucker called. Margaret? It's Constable Drucker. We've come to help you. No answer. They moved through the parlor, the kitchen, checking every room on the first floor. Empty. Upstairs, Drucker said quietly. The second floor was darker. The hallway stretched before them, doors on either side standing half open, revealing glimpses of beds, dressers, shadows. Drucker pushed open the door to the main bedroom. Inside, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Margaret Carver. She didn't look up. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. She wore the same gray dress she'd been seen in weeks ago. She looked tired, hollow, but alive. Margaret? Drucker said softly. She raised her head slowly. Her eyes were empty. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. We've come to take you home, Drucker replied. Margaret shook her head. This is home. No, this is just a house. No, she whispered. It's more than that. Cross stepped forward. Where's Henry? Where's Eliza? Margaret's gaze drifted toward the window. They're here. They're always here. Where? Everywhere. Tremont moved to the window and looked out. In the yard below, he saw a small figure standing by the well. Eliza. She was staring up at the house, unblinking. She's outside, Tremont said. I'm going to get her. Wait, Drucker started, but Tremont was already moving. His footsteps thundering down the stairs. The yard to Bill Tremont ran across the yard toward the well. His eyes locked on the small figure standing motionless beside it. Eliza, he called. It's all right. We're here to help. The child didn't move. Tremont slowed as he approached, suddenly uneasy. Something about the way she stood so still, so rigid, felt wrong. He stopped a few feet away. Eliza? Slowly, the child turned to face and it wasn't Eliza. The face was hers, pale, delicate, framed by dark hair. But the eyes were wrong. Too old, too knowing. And the expression the expression was hunger. She can't leave, the thing wearing Eliza's face said. Tremont stumbled backward. What are you? We are what remains. Where's Eliza? The real Eliza? The figure tilted its head. She is here. She's part of us now. How many? He whispered, all of them. Tremont turned and ran back toward the house. Tremont burst back into the house, wild-eyed. We need to leave, he gasped. Now, what happened? Drucker demanded. That's not Eliza. It's I don't know what it is, but we need to go. Cross grabbed his arm. What are you talking about? Before Tremont could answer, they heard it, a sound from below. A deep, resonant creak, like wood bending under immense weight. The cellar, Drucker whispered. Against every instinct. Drucker moved toward the cellar door at the back of the kitchen. Cross and Tremont followed, though their faces were pale with fear. Drucker opened the door. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. They descended slowly. The air grew colder, not naturally cold, but wrong, like stepping into a void. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a low-ceilinged space with a dirt floor and stone walls, and covering the walls, carved. Deep into the stone were names, hundreds of them. Drucker moved closer, holding the lantern high. Thomas Whitmore, 1801. Sarah and John Fletcher, 1823. The Pritchard family, 1867. On and on. Family after family. Name after name. All carved into the stone. All long forgotten. And at the end, freshly carved, still sharp-edged, the Carver family. 1879. This land, Cross whispered. How old is it? Drucker's voice was hollow. Older than the town. Older than the state. What was it before? I don't know. But whatever it was, it's still here. A voice echoed from the darkness at the far end of the cellar, low, resonant, many voices speaking as one. We are the keepers. We are the kept. We do not leave. We do not forget. Go, Drucker said. Now, they ran. The three men burst out of the house and ran for their horses. Behind them, every window in the house blazed with light, bright, golden, impossibly warm. And in every window, a figure stood watching. Henry, Margaret, Eliza, and others. So many others. They rode back to Ashford without speaking. When they arrived, Drucker went straight to his office, locked the door, and didn't come out for 2 days, November 10th, 1879. A decision was made. No formal vote. No town meeting. Just a quiet agreement among a dozen men, who met in the church at dusk. The house on Millbrook Road would burn. They arrived after midnight, carrying torches, oil, and resolve hardened by fear. Samuel Cross threw the first torch through a window. Bill Tremont poured oil along the porch. Within minutes, the house was engulfed. The men stood back and watched it burn. The fire was enormous, hotter and brighter than it should have been. The flames climbed into the sky, casting the valley in orange light, and as the house burned, people heard sounds. Not screams, not cries. Singing. Soft, mournful, a hymn sung by many voices. The men looked at each other, their faces pale. The singing continued until the roof collapsed. Then silence. By dawn, nothing remained but the stone foundation and the blackened chimney. The house was gone. The town tried to move on. No one spoke of the Carvers. No one went near the ruins. The land was left to grow wild, swallowed by vines and weeds. But the stories persisted. Travelers on Millbrook Road reported seeing lights where the house used to stand, faint, flickering, as if cast by candles in rooms that no longer existed. Others claimed to see figures moving across the empty foundation at dusk, tracing the outline of walls that had burned away. And on cold autumn nights, when the fog rolled in and the valley filled with silence, some said you could still hear it. Footsteps, moving from room to room, checking, waiting. Making sure everything was in order. In the spring of 1880, Mrs. Abigail Hallwell received a letter. There was no return address, no postmark. It had simply appeared on her porch one morning, folded neatly and tied with string. Inside, in Margaret Carver's handwriting, were 3 sentences. We are still here. We will always be here. The house does not need walls to exist. It only needs to be remembered. Abigail burned the letter, but she never forgot it. The foundation is still there, overgrown now, hidden beneath decades of ivy and thistle. The chimney collapsed in 1920. The well was filled in 1935, but locals still avoid the spot. Because on certain nights when the air is still and the moon is dark, you can see it, not the house itself, but the memory of it, a faint glow in the shape of windows, the suggestion of walls, the shadow of a door standing open. And if you listen closely, you can hear them, the Carvers, and all the others. Still tending the house, still waiting, still unable to leave. Because some places don't need to exist to hold you. They only need you to remember. The land where the Carver house stood is empty now. But emptiness is not the same as absence. And absence is not the same as gone. Some things remain, not because they are remembered, but because they refuse to be forgotten. Thank you for watching Untold Stories Exclusive. Until next time, stay curious and stay away from places that feel like they're watching you back.